cut a flat line. So now I'm going to start creating square sections across the top of the head. Comb that hair out of the way. I'm going to lift up a section behind it. We can see that low point in the middle, and I'm going to cut across. I'm going to comb it out of the way, and then I'm going to take a section behind, and I'm just going to work this all the way back. Does that make sense how I'm achieving that guideline?
Yes.
Does it make sense why I'm achieving that guideline? And what I'm doing with it to create the shape? Perfect. So I'm going to do that, Joe. If you want to throw out some texture shears, we can get into that.
All right. So I'm passing around just a bunch of different handles. Those will come back through. You guys get to listen to me for a minute. He's going to keep doing exactly what he said he was doing. He's not going to change his method until he's complete with that cut. So we're going to talk about what he's going to get into next, which is creating texture and how the tools can help you with that. We made the joke already, but what do we call these? Just scream out some names.
Texture shears.
Textures.
Thinning shears.
Thinning shears is the joke. I always say I don't need thinning, I need thickening shears, please. I got thinning under control. Okay? But basically they're multi-tooth shears and they have different purposes, okay? Oftentimes I will tell people, hey, you need one of these. And they're like, but I have one of these. And I'm like, that's great. But I assure you, since we got barbers in the room, these are not the same. They are similar in their function and you know the whole thing that kind of makes them what they are, but these are two very different tools. Okay? So I've got a hole in this pocket from when I did another class. I gotta sew it. Anyway, so I want you to look at the teeth, and we're going to explain why these are different. I'm going to pass these around, but this one's in my left hand here. But I'm going to just show you. Okay, the ones in my left hand are what we call basically your smoothing and blending. The ones on the right are creative texture. Okay, so on the left are your smoothing and blending. On the right is your creative texture. Okay, all right, smoothing and blending, creative texture. If you look at the teeth on the smoothing and blending, there's nothing super aggressive about them. They look fairly balanced, meaning the size of the teeth, the gapping, it's not scary, okay? And if you think about what that shear does is it's trying to remove weight and remove texture, okay? Those are gonna allow you to, like on this one, so there's two different ones here. So this is what most people will get, like when you're in school and whatnot, they're gonna give you something like this, probably like a 32. The difference between these two, smoothing and blending shears, is one has 40 teeth. This is for the barbers, okay? Meaning it's going to be all short hair smoothing and blending. I didn't show you.
You didn't.
I'm sorry, that was rude of me. Okay, so smoothing and blending. Here, hold this for me. See? Now I got to make you work for it. Okay, so this is going to be your short hair smoothing and blending. You see the teeth are very small and they're very close together. This is typically what replaces the 4420 that a lot of barbers have used, that their grandpa gave them and all that. This is really meant for short hair. This right here is meant for long and short hair. Meaning this right here, if for some reason we decided to do some women's work and we went into some longer hair, and we went to use this, it's going to remove so much so quickly, it's going to be bad, okay? But in the men's world, this is great. This shear right here is not as aggressive, so if you want to slow down the way it's removing weight, or you do get into women's work, this is going to be a better tool. Okay. Also, one of the cool things I want you guys to notice in all these shears when we pass them around is the shape of the teeth and the gap below. On all of these, I'm going to pass these around. At the bottom of the channel on all these, this is important. It's actually a half round circle. It's not square. Okay. And the reason for that is it allows you to take a section, close the shears, and just pull through. When you have square corners in there, when you pull the hair through, it actually will wedge in that corner and start to pull. Okay. So take a look at these as they go around here. And my wonderful assistant. Now these are your creative texture. Now I was like, the other ones look all smooth and whatnot. So obviously these look a little bit more aggressive, okay, a little bit scary, a little bit more abstract, whatever your words are. Okay. So what these are going to do is these are actually going to put texture back into the hair. All right. They can be used for smoothing and blending, different applications and whatnot. But so what these are going to do, and the reason why these are time savers, which time is money, this one right here, in case he's going to, yeah, that's right, I can say a certain amount because Casey likes to talk. This right here, this 13 tooth, think of this as 13 individual point cuts. So you take a section and you go like this. Okay, 13 times. This one, really scary and gnarly, right? Okay, I don't know because we got a lot of students, but if you've ever seen somebody take a section, they'll take the hair like this. So now I'm going to put this here because that's the hair. Okay, and they're going to take the points of the shears and they're going to do this, like notch cutting. You've seen that? They usually take like maybe 4 or 5. Okay. Well, guess what? Time saver, because you're taking out about that section. Okay. So these are going to allow you to do what a lot of people do manually, but a whole lot quicker. Time is money, and there's also a consistency, because one of Casey's biggest thing here is to talk about creating the same haircut more than once. Okay. And these tools are going to help you do that. So I'm going to pass these around as well. Is that enough time for you, bud?
Yeah. Does everybody see how I connected those guidelines? I took that. Yep.
I should cut it this way.
I was pulling outwards on the sides here. Honestly, just the comfort of my wrist. Because if I could take sections like this when my elbow is going to be up and you're going to get shoulder issues if you're constantly raising your elbows. You typically want to keep your client close to heart level because we love our clients. But also because
comes from the heart.
you know, but also because at that level your arms are even and the blood flow to your arms is more even, and it's not like making your heart pump and go up high, and you're also not over raising your shoulders. So keeping your body mechanics right and in tune is important to a long-term career, because repetitive motion is not something that the human body is meant for. So if we can establish a good cutting form, we're going to establish a longer career. So what I did was I'm just elevating. This is a loose guideline out the side here. I'm basically just trying to take a square section off the side of the head because I just want to remove some of that bulk so I can go in and blend it at the end here. But what I also wanted to do was, you guys will notice I'm doing a side part, but instead of taking that and just parting the hair and cutting everything this way and everything this way, I cut it symmetrically. When I teach any of the people that work at my barbershop, I trained an apprentice and I've taught the barbers that work for me this technique. I tell everybody, when you look at any haircut, pretend they got to get out of a pool right after you cut their hair. Like they just, when the water just pulls the hair down, how is it going to look when they step out of that? Is it going to look just totally insane that it only looks good when you've blow dried it and put product in it? Or is it going to look somewhat natural if that client decides not to do their hair? Because a lot of times when you look at these hard parted haircuts, you'll have the hard part here, it's shaved up like right to that one side, and then there's that 4 inches of hair, and when it falls over, they just have this shelf of hair hanging over. And the problem is that they don't have their hair styled over, it looks ridiculous. So the thing that I tell them is make sure that if this client were to just go out without any product, they want to go to CVS and just grab something, and they don't want to have to do all their hair, is that haircut going to look acceptable, and is it going to look even and symmetrical? The other thing is too, by keeping this blended this way, if he decides to part his hair here, it's always going to blend in. If he decides to take that part up, it's always going to blend in on that outside. I'm never going to have to worry about the weight from this outside not blending in and taking it too high, and then all of a sudden there's a piece that the hair is missing there, or it's overhanging and now he doesn't have a blended haircut. So when I go through a traditional side parted haircut, I want to create a symmetrical look. So as I go into this next section, which is my favorite part because it's a little bit unorthodox for how most people create the transition from short to long, I'm going to do a middle part because that's going to follow that guideline I created the middle, and it's going to make sure that either way, if the hair falls one way or the other, it's always going to blend in. So I want to kind of like touch back on one of the main things that I said at the beginning, and it talked about blending. And when we blend downward, what happens? What do we do by blending downward? Does anyone remember?
Removing weight?
We retain weight, so we keep weight. But when we blend upwards, we remove weight.
Okay.
What I see a lot of people do is they go into this section, right? We set his head up, we press our comb to his head, and we start cutting. That's our first instinct, correct?
Yeah.
Most people's it is. The reason I don't want to do that is because we established a weight point here for a reason. That's where I want the weight and the shape of that haircut to fall. What I want this hair to do is just simply blend into that point. So if I go in and I just start cutting upwards, I'm just going to take all of this out. We are going to cut hair through here, but I don't want to go into it and just start cutting up and just pushing it all up, because then all of a sudden we're going to remove that square shape that we created, and his head's going to it's going to turn into like a faux hawk. And then just the top of his hair is going to be really long, and we're going to create a triangular shape because we're going to cut all of this weight out. So I want to keep that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet his hair down and we're going to do that center part. I want to talk a little bit about body mechanics again before we get into how I'm going to approach this. So when we look at our scissors and we use our scissors, they're no different than our clipper. It's just our hand is the machine versus a motor. When I take this clipper and I turn it on, besides loud buzzing, what happens? Come on, it's not, I'm asking the obvious. Yeah, the blades are moving. Are both of them moving?
Automatic and manual.
Yep, but are both blades moving?
No, just one blade.
There's just one blade moving. So as Joe might have mentioned lightly, when we're cutting, you want to keep one blade only moving. It has to do with the shape of a Japanese shear. Joe can tell you more about that, but I'm going to give you the basics of the actual technical side of it for application. If I am doing the Pac-Man, which I see all too often in barbershops and salons, and we're cutting like this, we're going to give ourselves carpal tunnel, and we're going to create an absolutely indefinite line of where we're cutting. Every time this closes, it's closing at a different height each time I close that scissor. So I see people go in and they're just doing one of these. And the problem is every time that closes, it could close down here, then I could close it again, it'll close up here, close down here. And every time we go up, we're creating a line like this. And that's where we see that shelf effect, that stacked effect for a lot of guys. It's really hard to get out. I want to focus on keeping that still blade on the bottom and the top blade moving only. One way to achieve that: tilt your scissor instead of cutting flat in your hand, so flat out like this. I'm actually going to take it back and put it under the big knuckle on my pointer finger. What I'm then going to do is I'm just going to use the tip of my thumb when I'm moving that moving blade. I'm not going to put my thumb in all the way to the knuckle. If you put your thumb in all the way to just the tip. It's the only time I suggest that. But in this situation, when you're cutting, by doing that, we're allowing ourselves to keep the top of our hand stable and only the bottom to be moving. Your thumb's the only finger with a muscle in it. That's the only finger you can train to have muscle memory. So it's important to teach ourselves that. If you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. Not a lot of people are. Place the shear right on your leg when you're watching TV, you're hanging out. If you got a break and you're just sitting there, you could even be texting. Keep that still blade resting right on your leg and just focus on moving your thumb. If the blade is bouncing, or if your arm's on an armrest and it's like this, and you feel your arm moving off the armrest, it means you're moving the top of your hand, and that's the incorrect way to cut hair. You want to focus on establishing that, because now we're going to have a clean cutting point. Because that right there is now our cutting line. So when that closes, that's exactly where that hair is going to cut. When we take our clipper and we put a guard on, our guard acts like what?
Comb.
I heard it, a comb. So when we put our comb up to our shear, I want it to work the same way as the clipper. It attaches to the still blade. So that blade that we put on the bottom that's going to stay still is going to always match up with that comb. If that comb is going at this direction, so is the bottom blade. If it's at an angle this way, so is my bottom blade. I never want to be cross-cutting in any direction because I'm going to be over-directing left or right, and then I'll be cutting across that, and I'm going to create notches. So I always want to make sure that these work in unison. I tell a lot of people, pretend that this pin of the shear goes straight through the corner of that comb, and it's attached. And these work just like one machine. So wherever the spine of that comb is, where all that hair is going to rest up against, is going to fall right in line with our cutting line, and we're going to have a precision cut every single time. You're going to get much more improved shear results, just scissor over comb. And barbers, you're going to find that that blend becomes a lot easier. It's just like doing clipper over comb. You have two cutting points that are flat every time. It's going to be just like shear over comb. We're going to create a clean cut every single time we do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So now, we go into this section. I'm going to take his bangs out of the way because I'm leaving those out of the equation right now. What I want to do is create a square shape through here. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going in and cutting upwards and removing weight, I'm going to take this section elevated straight up from square from his head, and I'm going to cut a guideline across the top. I'm then going to take and lift the hair. When I lift that hair, remove that out of the way. When I lift that hair back up, I'm going to find that guideline on the top of this hair sitting down, and I'm going to cut along the spine again. And I'm going to drop it down. And I'm actually going to blend downward, and then from there I can smooth it out. So what that's going to do is, it's going to leave weight through here, but we're going to be able to blend that in. Ignoring this front corner for right now, because we're going to go in with a 40T and we're going to soften that weight right on the front corner. I'm going to work around the head and show you guys what I'm talking about. So I'm going to take that guideline, I'm going to lift up square from the head, I'm going to cut. I'm going to cut. And every time I'm dropping it right down. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that square shape and I'm dropping it into the curved shape of the head. And I'm establishing weight in this zone that's going to be able to style back. And then I'm creating a blend into that heavy point of that fade. I'm not focused on right here right now. Everyone focuses right on that and we try to get that out. There's a blending shear to remove that. There's a reason we have our tools, so we let the tool do what it's supposed to do. So right now I'm just focusing on shape. So I'm taking this up and I'm creating a square point off that guideline. So I just want to set a high guideline all the way around here, and then I can take that and drop it down. So now that'll drop in. I'm going to do a couple sections here and then smooth it out. And then from there, I can smooth all that in so that then all blends in. So when this is going to style up, we're going to pull that hair back and it's going to pull back this way. Once we blow dry this, we're going to style this back and it's going to all blend in. I don't want to take that weight out because I want to create shape on the outside of this head. I'm going to go around the head. We're just going to carry that guy. So you can see as I'm cutting, it's important that I'm focusing that still blade because then when I fan up, I create a smoothing effect. And again, I'm following a little bit lower in the back because I want to keep that weight over the occipital bone and by the cowlick. So I'm leaving weight in here because I'm going to style that with my blow dryer. I'm going to blend through this side. Can you guys see behind me? I apologize if I'm blocking it up this thing. This actually in the shop is where I focus most of my time on. So, you know, of my 30-minute block, I'll spend 20 to 22 minutes of the time cutting hair, and I spend that 8 to 10 styling. This is probably the most precision, or like not precision, but time spent on any part of the haircut. Because for me, this is what makes or breaks any blended scissor cut. Because if you can do this part and smooth this out, that makes the big difference for most clients. Because this is where most haircuts get kind of ruined. Kind of at a weird angle, so I'm just trying to show you guys, but when it comes to cutting with that backwards angle on the shear, I'm kind of showing people, but when you're working with it, you're not going to work straight onto a section. You're actually going to work at a slightly off section because with tilting that shear back, we're not perpendicular to our body. If the shear was out here, I could cut in a straightforward section. But if I'm have it back here, instead of working like this, I'm actually going to work here because now I can keep my arm straight and I can keep that shape through my wrist so I don't get any issues with tendons, muscles, anything like that. So, I'm just going to tilt you. So when you're tilting the shear going back like that, you're actually going to work on a section behind you, in a sense, from the area that's perpendicular to your body. Does that drop technique make sense to people, why I'm doing that? Let the weight fall in.
So when you make your first guideline, is it, where do you decide?
For here?
Yeah, at the top.
So I pull the bangs out of the way, so you could almost do like a pie section to take the bangs out of the way, and then I'll actually lift up square to the head. So I'm taking that section and I'm following this shape and I'm going straight up until I see the bulk of the hair fall into it, and I'm going to elevate to the highest point that I didn't cut. So I'm going to lift straight up from the head square this way and cut, and then I'm just going to drop it down. And with the head shape like this, by elevating above it, it just drops right into where that clipper work was. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now there's a little bit of weight that builds up below this with straighter hair like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that until the end when I blow dry the hair, because then I can go in and I can cross cut with the hair dry and just smooth out any blending that needs to be done. But I don't want to do, I prefer not to do my blending shear always on wet hair, because I like to go back in and fine tune it and see how it styles before I start blending and cutting weight out. Sometimes the hair is just wet, so it looks darker than it really is. And if we take weight out before we need to, it's hard to kind of, you can't put hair back on. So if we ruin that appearance and take out too much weight, you can't go back and put it back on. So I'd rather actually dry the hair and style it and see how it's going to sit and react before I go back in and blend that hair. So I've got the bulk of that done. I do want to just show some basic texturizing techniques. want to just show how we can apply those texture shears to create texture within a haircut, because if you look at my page, that's a lot of the work I do is texturized haircuts. And Joe was talking about that before, with how we can simplify the texturizing that we're doing. So a lot of people on Instagram right now will see these videos of a guy taking a section up and go like this, and then with point cut, right?
But he does it faster than you.
He's a little faster than me on Instagram. So what do we do when we point cut? Like that.
Create texture, no?
So what I'm doing right
The note
there,
part was right.
what I'm doing right there is absolutely nothing. What I'm doing is taking a straight line and I'm making it fuzzy. If we're gonna go in and we're gonna point cut a haircut, we wanna take hair out from our fingers and we